The racial wealth gap is, as you know, is staggering. Blacks are about 13% of the U.S. population, but only have 2.6% of the nation's wealth. And that translates into an average household differential between blacks and whites in net worth of about $800,000 in 2016 dollars. That's the gap that needs to be closed by a reparations program. In the aftermath of the Civil War, the ancestors of today's living Black Americans were promised restitution for their years of slavery in the form of 40-acre land grants that were never given to them. So we estimated that if you took the most conservative interpretation of that allocation, it would be 10 acres per formerly enslaved person. So there were 4 million folks who were emancipated at the end of the Civil War. So that would mean 40 million acres of land should have been allocated to them on that basis. And that's the low end estimate. The present value would probably be anywhere between $4 and $6 trillion. The Black rate of mortality nationally, that's derived from data drawn from the states that actually have collected data on the basis of race and ethnicity. The Black mortality rate is 2.2 times as high as both the Latino and the Asian rate, and is 2.4 times as high as the white rate. And if we explore potential explanations why that's the case, I think it can be linked in some significant ways to wealth differentials. So, for example, wealth position makes it more essential for Blacks to hold low-wage employment in arenas where their work is deemed essential, even if they are not deemed essential. I would like people to pay close attention not only to what happened in Tulsa in 1921, but the entire wave of white massacres that took place from the end of the Civil War up until World War II. These massacres not only cost Black people their lives, but also resulted in extensive damage to Black property or the appropriation of that property by whites. I think people need to have a much better understanding of the history of white violence in the United States and how that's connected to the racial wealth gap. But if we're going to address the question of restitution for Black Americans for the cumulative effects of slavery, the period of Jim Crow or legal segregation in the United States, accompanied by white terror campaigns, and ongoing atrocities like mass incarceration, police executions of unarmed Blacks, discrimination in labor markets, in credit markets, in housing markets, then we need something that is going to focus on the racial wealth gap, which, to my way of thinking, captures the cumulative intergenerational consequences of this entire trajectory of harms. The GI Bill is established in such a way after World War II that it's administered in a decentralized fashion, which gave Southern authorities complete discretion over who would get the benefits. So, for example, in the state of Mississippi, only 2 GIs who were Black veterans received any mortgage support from the GI Bill. In the book that I've just completed with Kirsten Mullen, From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, we argue that the payments might be made in the form of endowments or a trust account, where individuals would be allowed to spend the interest off the account in any given year, but could only dip into the principal subject to approval for a plan of action or a proposal that they develop. in the present moment, the federal government overnight essentially came up with, well, some people say it's $2.2 trillion. Some people say it's as much as $6 trillion because of the loans that were made by the Federal Reserve Board. But it came up with that money overnight. There were no new taxes administered. And I think that the present experience, or the current experience, demonstrates that the federal government can spend on virtually anything it wants to spend on. You're denying all newly emancipated Black Americans, virtually all of them, you're denying them any initial stake in wealth as compensation for their years of forced labor and forced time under slavery. That's how you begin to create. That's the origin point, I think, for the contemporary racial wealth gap. That's where it started.